Christmas 2023 is right around the corner. So from the Michael Smith family to the now more than 100 members of the Big Smith family, happy birthday, Jesus. There are also many Big Smith family birthdays this month and in the next few months. Bernie turns 70. Joe turns 75. Marge turns 80. And Kathy turns 82. We thought that a great way to celebrate all those jubilarians was to share with you a real gem. Our mother, Mommy as we called her most of her life, Mutti in her senior years, wrote this little-known book about all of her special Christmases. She typed it out on her old Smith Corona and made corrections with a pen. Titled Christmas Celebrations on Maryfarm from the First to the Last, it's a peek back in time to 83 years ago. As was her way, she decorated the front insert with autumn leaves collected in Boulder, Colorado in 1981. I love the book so much that about 25 years ago, I recorded it in studio as a gift to Mutti, and she loved it. So to celebrate all the special birthdays at this time, my wife Terry helped me to edit photos and video to the words of the recorded book. Of course, we didn't have the exact images to cover everything that Mutti wrote about, so we just did our best. So, here for Christmas 2023 is Mutti's Christmas book.
The Christmas book, written by Eva Smith in 1981, read by Mike Smith, the seventh of her 10 grateful children. Chapter 1, The First Christmas of Our Married Life, 1940. Our poorly furnished living room in the cold tenement was cluttered with 10-inch high stables made from apple crates. Simple Christmas crib figures were being cut out of the thinner boards. We mixed dry pigments with water for paints. The stylized faces and robes had to be carefully outlined and painted in. I had also used some of the paint to create a mural of the German Reisenberg to dress up the bland walls. Jigsaws and Chinese paintbrushes were all over. The artist Ada Bethune had invented this Christmas crib set for the craft shop of the unemployed at the Catholic Worker in the slums of New York City. It was there that I had met Victor Edmund Smith in February 1940. I had come from a Germany that was spreading war all over Europe. Shy little Eva Gretz, sporting a cocky soft hat with a feather on it, tried to convince the big man, 8 years her senior, that she'd be willing to share his voluntarily espoused work for the poor. We were married in the Church of Our Lady Star of the Sea and celebrated with a scrambled egg breakfast, Catholic worker style. We were to live on the 1-acre farming community in Staten Island. That was September 17th, but now, at Christmas, we were back in the city. We had not planned it this way. I was to learn that the life we had chosen, our Master said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways." There were constant changes and surprises. Vic had already learnt to live that way in his 33 years. He told about Christmas celebrations in the beautiful home of his parents in Providence, Rhode Island. His father would bring them to midnight mass, then wait outside. Presents were piled under the tall tree when they returned. They had skiing trips, school parties, and in the summer went fishing, clamming, and swimming at Cape Cod. In 1924, Vic was a senior in high school. His father contracted typhoid fever in New York City on a business trip as manager of bronze casting for the Gorham Company. He was very sick and asked for a friend of the family, a Catholic priest, to talk to him. Victor Smith Sr. was baptized, received the sacraments, and died January 3, 1925. He was 55 years old. In his wallet, they found the Sacred Heart badge Vic had given to him 8 years earlier when he consoled his parents as they rushed him to the emergency room with a burst appendix. The father's death changed the direction of Vic's life. On insistence of his mother, he enrolled in Brown University and lived at home. He wrote and edited school publications. During summer vacations, he worked as a meter reader, waiter in seashore resorts, and set lobster traps. When he was hired as a reporter for the Providence Journal in 1929, he did not complete his senior year in college. Vic was very popular, charming with the ladies, though quite unconscious of his social graces, according to his kid sister Muriel, who loved to tag along with him and his friends. His mother excused his favoritism by proclaiming, "Vic has a big heart." Mixed with the mischievous boy in him was a very serious and studious young man. News reporters were a special class of people, hardworking, always on the spot. Vic even took over the financial reports during the bank crashes. They had their fun too and got into trouble during Prohibition in speakeasies and clubs. Vic went right along with it, even hailed the wagon that had picked up the revelers. "Wait for me, I belong with a gang too." After working the night hours, Tom Langan and Vic often went to the Printer's Mass at 4 a.m. at the Trappist Monastery in Valley Falls, Rhode Island. The peaceful yet very penitential life of those monks, who kept silence except while praising God, made a deep impression, but it was an unexplainable jolt at the newspaper office when Vic left to enter the cloister of the Cistercians of the Strict Observance as a postulant in 1933. His mother had made retreats there and sought the advice of their guest master, lively, humorous Father Michael, OCSO, a former Canadian Mountie. The 10 months Vic spent in their novitiate learning to live by the rule of St. Benedict shaped his strong character and marked him indelibly for the rest of his life. His health did not stand up under the rigors of the monk's life, working in the fields, studying, praying, fasting, and rising at 2 a.m. After recovering at home and remodeling a house by the beach, Vic became a reporter with a Catholic Providence Visitor. He later followed some of his newspaper friends to New York City and wrote radio scripts for the WPA, Works Project Administration. Settling into a plush job at Westinghouse in the publicity department made him restless, and his time seemed wasted. On May Day, he encountered the Catholic Worker Monthly, sold for 1 cent. He hoped to get a job with the outfit. Here were people dedicating their lives to the poorest of the poor in crowded tenements. Peter Morin's challenge to resettle poor families on farming communities in a green revolution struck a chord of response. Dorothy Day, co-founder with Peter, welcomed young intellectuals. Vic rarely wrote for the Catholic Worker paper. He was asked to care for a dying newspaperman, straightened up drunks, created work for the unemployed in the craft shop, and opened a discussion group with Jews and Protestants. The monastic life had prepared him for this very extreme life with people of all types. I met Vic in the craft shop of the Union of Unemployed among the ragged, down-and-out men. Though he also wore an old sweater and torn socks, as I was quick to perceive, he undoubtedly was a person of good upbringing and education. A big, handsome man, his neat, short, graying hair did not match his youthful face and twinkling eyes, so blue and full of interest and joy. His square jaw was softened by his genuine smile. You felt comfortable and important in his presence. His home was a bunk in the house of hospitality of the Catholic Worker. Quite often he had to give that up for a stranger and find a bench in the office to sleep on. He did not have enough money to renew his driver's license, as he was not paid for his long hours of work. In Hitler's Germany, it had become impossible for me to start a farming community of enthusiastic youths. Coming to the fully developed, industrialized states, I had little hope of finding such people. My only lead was to the Catholic Worker. As a middle-class young lady, I had never been in touch with workmen, and I was a Catholic only by baptism and had received my first and last Holy Communion at the age of 12. It took all my willpower not to turn right around when I encountered all the drunks on the Bowery and in the soup line of the Catholic Worker. Yet when I met Victor Smith, I knew my search had ended. We talked on many long walks through city streets, but marriage was the farthest thing from his mind. He speculated that he might return to the Trappists. Vic never asked any personal questions or preached about his faith, but he lived it so intensely and so naturally that I was determined to learn more about this very special life. I finally overcame my shyness and went to confession to clear away 12 years of an untamed and carelessly selfish life. Finally, I could come forward from the back of the church to the altar rail, where Vic knelt so filled with love as he received Holy Communion. He never told me if he was conscious of my presence. At that time, my brothers and I were waiting desperately to hear from the Dutch steamer Penland that was to bring Mother over from England. War's destruction had already reached the British Isles, and Holland was overrun by the Nazis. Vic's prayers for Mother taught me the urgent need and efficacy of being in touch with a power that was stronger than dictators and armies. The King of Peace did not condone these mass murders and perils on the seas, the starving and gassing of old and weak people in concentration camps, of which my grandmother and other Jewish relatives became victims. We were willing to do any kind of penance and labor to be on the side of the Lord who could bring about peace. We liked the Catholic worker idea of building a civilization where men could be self-sufficient, have some land to cultivate, and work in close union with neighbors, assisting the helpless. In our chosen life, we still had more than the people in war-ravaged lands. I knew if I wanted to be part of Vic's life, I could never ask for a modern home and all the things young girls dream of. I had to be content with the clothes from the distribution cellar in Mott Street, even for our wedding. Whatever food we had, we would share with others who would inhabit our home, hopefully an old farmhouse in a community on the land. The next weeks were full of doubt and pain. In Germany, I had helped to lead a teetotaler Wandervogel group who sought to bring a useful, exciting life through hiking, songs, and camaraderie to waifs whose life was blighted by alcoholic parents. It took all my strength to overcome my disgust for the men who smelled of liquor and talked incohesively. Vic himself was on the wagon, but there were 2 incidents drinking with friends. When I had to bail him out of jail, where he got himself for disorderly conduct, he was so disgusted with himself that he permanently abstained from all alcoholic drinks. When offered a glass at a social gathering, he shrugged his shoulders. I just can't handle the stuff, though it was his resolve to accept every gift graciously, whether he liked it or not. Without stimulants, he was always happy and jovial at parties. I had to change my life from a wayfarer across the ocean, chartering my own course, to a pilgrim who does not know where the road leads to. Men, women, and children crowded around, taking up Vic's time and energy. He was always in demand and knew how to help. I just wanted to be at his side. At our wedding in the church in Huguenot, Staten Island, my mother, for whose safe arrival Vic had prayed, and my brothers joined us unexpectedly and shared our Catholic worker celebration on the tiny farm in the rural part of the island. My brother Charlie lent us his station wagon for a honeymoon trip to his clubhouse in the Berkshires with $20 from George. We had, however, to cut this beautiful experience short as my phantom asthma overcame me with the night fog. Vic had to drive me, without a license, to Roosevelt Hospital on the west side of New York City for a set of treatments. To pay the rent for a small room with a cooking booth, Vic found a job, holding the ladder for the men who were polishing the shiny skyscrapers near Central Park. He graduated to washing windows, many flights up. When we moved to a tenement closer to Mott Street, we could get lunch at the Catholic Worker soup and stale bread. We also shared their problems. Our tiny spare room was soon occupied by a woman who had been evicted. Before Christmas, a transient bedded down in the living room. Vic talked to him till late into the night. He was a priest. Drinking had ruined his health and his vocation. Vic's kind understanding, careful listening, and total dedication to the suffering of others worked like a soothing balm on the confused soul. I was not able to accompany Vic to midnight mass in the damp night air. In the morning we completed our last crib sets, and Vic trudged through the slushy streets to deliver them. When he returned, laden with gifts from our customers, his worn-out shoes were soaked through. He had to gather up some discarded wood from the street to arouse the small fire in our potbelly stove. We shared a turkey Christmas dinner in the house of hospitality with the homeless. We had placed our own crib set on a chest. Some figures had not been good enough to sell, and Vic had brought a scrawny evergreen left over on a tree lot. At last, we were alone. Through Vic's slow and warming retelling of the Christmas story in his personal and happy way, it became alive for me. We were part of that homey stable which Joseph fixed for Mary and the expected baby, and of the surprised shepherds. I did not long for any more than I had, only for that little child we both hoped would come someday, though there was no promise yet. Vic told me about his sisters and his mother in Rhode Island. He had not been in touch with them. They wouldn't understand that he could get married with a dime in his pocket, no home and no job. His mother had a great ambition for her youngest son. Would she understand that there were higher things to strive for than worldly success? He missed his kid sister Muriel, now married to a struggling young doctor with their first little child. Vic went to New York partly to get away from the womenfolk, including his oldest sister Selma, caring alone for her twin boys, and his loving godmother Aunt Clem. He had seen his brother George Farnham on Long Island, even worked as an extra in his post office last Christmas. His mother had not accepted the poor family George had married into. Vic recalled one Christmas when he and his father had, without Mother's knowledge, brought a wheelbarrow full of coal to the newlyweds after George returned from World War I. What would his mother say about him living in a cold water flat, married to a girl who was obstinate enough to think that she could raise a family in voluntary poverty? Vic determined to write a belated Christmas card to his mother and to tell her. He was sure she would like his girl, who was willing to embrace the vocation he had chosen and who made it so much more wonderful for him. The bright star was shining in the silence of the night. Chapter 2. Our First Baby, Christmas 1942. We were snowed in, up in the highest house on Maryfarm. The bitter cold had eased a little since that disastrous night on November the 20th, when the temperature dropped to 16 degrees below zero. The cistern pump had frozen, and the water in the kettle had also frozen. We had to turn off the smelly kerosene stove and keep piling more blankets and coats on our bed and baby Catherine's. In the morning, Vic had tried to light a fire in the big stove. We had placed it in front of the fireplace, as Miss Branham's summer house could hardly be heated. The wood was wet, only recently cut, and the smoke forced us to close off the large living room and be content with a fire in the cook stove to heat the tiny kitchen. We were not prepared. We were only staying in this house as Vic had not been able to stone up the well he had dug for Miss Branham before the deep frost set in. He had to lower a bucket on a rope into that deep cavern to get some water for the house. But on this cold morning, we could only melt some snow and hope to thaw out the cistern pump. We had moved to Maryfarm in March 1941 and lived in a small house on the lower farm. When Catherine was born, she had a little room there next to the large cold back room, which was our bedroom and workshop. We had to share the house and the kitchen with several single men. When Catherine was 7 months old, I had some bad asthma attacks again, but could not make the trip to New York to the allergy clinic as I was still nursing her. I had to wean her anyway, and she was by then able to drink from a cup. It was suggested that the air would be more pure up on top of the hill, and we moved to the big farmhouse there, sharing it with a Hughes family and for some weeks with Peter Moran. Vic started to dig the well, and we were offered to spend the winter in Miss Branham's house, though it had not been built for winter. She only spent her summer vacations there with some of her pupils. The Hughes had left after Joe got a job in a munitions factory, which displeased Dorothy Day. However, anybody who had to go regularly to a job moved away from this very hard-to-reach hill. Even cars would not last on that rocky road. The year before, the Haneys had lived on the hill, and, with Hazen's help, had grown a great surplus of vegetables, even potatoes, which they could share with the House of Hospitality in Mott Street. The Haneys had gone back to Milwaukee, a bit disillusioned with the slow progress on Maryfarm, and Hazen, who lived there nearly as well as the Trappist with whom he had stayed for a while, had married a city girl who was not able to cope with our simple life and found it more destitute than in the tenements in New York. The last summer's crop had been much poorer, as there were not enough hands, and most of the action was on the lower farm. Even Vic had to spend much time helping with the retreat house and talking to visitors. Now in December, only 2 single men were living in the big farmhouse, and they spent their days down below keeping warm in their kitchen. They lugged big bales of hay from the upper barn for the animals down below. Vic joined them when he had to help with the farm work. He brought up our share of provisions that had come from Mott Street. They were meager. Much of the allotted money went for tobacco. Even though the men rolled their own cigarettes, the money left for groceries was very insufficient. But the men could not do without their smokes. Vic had smoked for years, too, in the newspaper office. He cut down very much and shared his pack with the others. Soon after, he quit smoking altogether. On Christmas Eve, we set our little crib set on a table by the window in the large room. From there, we could see far into the valley and the hills in the distance, if the window panes were not shut by thick ice. Vic left under a starry sky to join the others for the long trek to St. Joseph's Church in Easton. He had carefully tucked in his tiny, lively, bald-headed daughter and also her mother. But when I expected Vic back from midnight mass, I got up, stoked the fire, and made a hot drink. In a package from my brother Hans, we had received a real German Christmas chocolate. Stolen, it was called, for a snack on that cold night up here on our lonely hill. We had decorated a little tree. Vic had to go far to find it. In the morning, we built a roaring fire in the stove by the fireplace with the dry wood we had laid aside. When Catherine awoke, Vic carried her over to the Christmas manger. She stretched out her arms and laughed and nearly jumped off his arm. Very clearly came her first word, baby, emerging from her jabbering. Then she put her arms tight around Vic's neck and said, Papa. I could feel his great love for that little daughter, and you could not find more happiness than in the union of a mother and father and their child. Let the frozen silence stay outside. In here, it was a real holiday. Soon the smell of pork roast penetrated the house. They had killed a pig on the lower farm, and John the farmer had driven his team of horses up that dangerous road as soon as possible after the critical freeze-up. Sauerkraut was a special treat with it. It was taken from the barrels many busy hands had filled in the summer from the big cabbage crop. For me, these winter months were like a retreat. I spent much time with my little one, watching her standing up in the playpen and starting to walk at 10 months. When she was sleeping, I read many fascinating books to learn more about the religion I so recently had discovered through Vic. Father McGee from the Syrian parish in Easton, a friend of Vic and the Trappists, provided me with The Revelations of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich about the life of the Blessed Mother and her son Jesus Christ. Her vivid description of the holy night in the cave made us share even more their poverty and their immense joy. We felt a little guilty to have so much peace, as the feast of the King of Peace was not celebrated everywhere with a pause in the terrible fighting all through the Orient and Europe, though it lay buried in all the hearts of the suffering people. Since our country had joined the combatants after Pearl Harbor, Mother could not write to her mother in Holland anymore. She received a few reports via Switzerland. My grandmother was living with grave deprivations. She just hoped that the fierce Nazi soldiers might not find that one lonely 80-year-old blind woman. But they did. Her last letter read, "You won't hear from me anymore. Farewell." The last we had been able to tell her was that I expected a baby, and she was so delighted that life would go on. And for us, it was only the beginning of building a family to the glory of God. Yes, there is room in the inn. Chapter 3, Christmas on Maryfarm from 1946 to 1955. Peter Moran died in 1949 after having lived in total withdrawal for a few years. It was he who had made the creation of farming communities the main program of the Catholic worker. When war ended, these experiments had declined as prosperity was returning. The men coming home from conscientious objector camps or the medical corps were not ready to settle down. Many found the austerity of the Trappist monasteries an answer to the shake-up of war. Dorothy Day concentrated on the poor in the cities, on pacifism and strikes, civil disobedience, and the renewal of the church, paving the way for changes to come. For our community on Maryfarm, it was meant we had to get by without the help of the Catholic worker. We still accepted anybody who wanted to join us for shorter or longer time. Guy Tobler bought the teacher's house on top of the hill and lived there with his afflicted sister Fifi, cared for by Winifred. The income Fifi's father had set aside for his girl had to be divided by cleverly handling of Winifred to buy food for over 20 people at times. We planted gardens to have a healthful diet, ground wheat, and baked the good bread. Goats gave milk for the children, and the kids and rabbits supplied some food. We raised chicken and ducks, but there was never enough for all. To buy feed was too expensive, and table scraps were meager, as we all belonged to the Clean Plate Club. Outdoor life and the long walks for the school children gave all a very good appetite. At Christmas time, we suggested to our relatives, especially Vic's sisters, not to send presents or toys for the children, rather a gift of money with which we could take care of essentials. Most of the financial donations, even the dollar bill a godmother would put in a Christmas card, paid for our real estate taxes. We and the children prayed for all who made it possible for us to stay here. My mother knew what we needed as she visited each year. She knitted large numbers of mittens and socks, sometimes sweaters. Every time she came, she admired another one of the round blonde babies, healthful and full of fun, but she could not understand how we could care for yet one more. There was always enough food. In winter, the fare might be limited to whole wheat bread. Our wheat bins were filled in the fall. For a long time, Papa's chore was to grind it by hand, and Catherine helped standing on the high box. Later, we had a small motor. We had roots from the vegetable garden. Some of the children's rabbits made Sunday dinners, or some donated deer meat. We picked up crates from the wholesale grocers, cold celery, and other greens. Fish markets gave us the produce they could not keep over the weekend. Even under the snow, we could find wild garlic for flavor. For many years, just before Christmas, the boys rode their sleds down the steep, curvy hill and pulled them laden with bags of potatoes, which our dear Protestant friend Mr. Lurch had picked up for us at a farmer's market. He also bought and brought a few games from his children, which amused our gang on the rare days that the weather would not permit them outdoors, helping with the wood or enjoying the snow. Catherine and Victor had fixed a library in the basement of Uncle Guy's house. The girls had real babies to play with, mommy with, though they would have liked a doll too. At age 4, little Margaret stood Victor up on a low chair and pinned on his diaper. When Joseph, Peter, and Michael were born in 3 consecutive years, they had a second mother in Margaret, and their love for her remained all their lives. The older boys received help with their schoolwork from Catherine under Uncle Guy's tutelage. Before setting off for school, Catherine milked the goats and fed the chickens. She took good care of the other children, who one by one joined her for school. They found her a little bossy, but she was a good leader on that 1-hour trek to St. Joseph's School. Christmas vacations found all the children preparing gifts for the adults, sending drawings to relatives and writing letters. They gave each other presents, some little treasure that had been passed on to them. Shortly before the holy night, Vic slung his saw over his shoulder. Young Guy carried the axe, and the smaller boys followed with ropes and bags. The expedition into the woods became an adventure. They learned how to pull the 2-man saw in cooperative rhythm, how to choose the trees for cutting and leave the best standing. They identified the leafless species by the bark, collected bittersweet with pretty orange and red berries. They found straw flowers, decorative grasses, pine cones, and artistic pieces of wood. When they returned laden with evergreens and all their treasures, plus a big appetite, they smelled the fresh bread all through the house. It was covered with a cloth. Papa, with a glint in his eyes and the pretended sneakiness of a little boy, cut some slices of the fresh loaf for a snack. If they could find peanut butter, it was a real feast. Papa also worked with the boys in the barn. With the odds and ends he had collected, they could construct wagons to haul kindling, make ingenious little toys for the youngest, and many other original creations. Vic collected everything from the people who asked him to clean out their attics and cellars. What they mostly wanted was to talk to Vic. They would tell him all their problems, and he listened well, always had some consoling and strengthening thoughts to leave with them. He expressed real caring and could cheer anybody up. After resting up from the long walk to midnight mass, the boys would gather in Guy's community room, sitting on the floor near the fireplace. We had prepared a large, gaily covered box for each one. There were few surprises: cookies, rare treats of sweets, and red apples, on top of school clothes refashioned by Winifred's skillful hands, second-hand shoes and boots patched patiently by the men. Many good garments were inherited by the cousins in Providence, festive dresses for the girls, and Sunday suits from Muriel's only son, Rick. By caring for them over the years, each of the boys was outfitted. Later, it was the children's turn to make a surprise for Fifi and the parents. They all disappeared. A little angel with curtain wings called us to come to the stable. We heard the baaing of the sheep and the hee-haw of the little donkey, Macaroni, who was with us that year. The goats quietly chewed their cud. Children's voices sang "Jer Kinderlein kommet," the only German song I had taught them. A little Mary was holding the youngest baby tenderly in her arms. It was a girl that year. Chubby little Joseph had pasted on a cotton beard. Shepherds wore their coats inside out for better effect. Tiny angels held their tinsel stars over the crib. They sang all the hymns they had partly remembered, coached from the rear by one of the mothers. The faint light of a lantern gave the illusion of the first Christmas night. For other years, original plays were written and acted out as the children grew. When Uncle Guy moved to the farm in 1947, he brought with him his car, carefully negotiating the rocky hill. It became the victim of one Christmas expedition. The children of school age walked, and the smaller ones rode with Winifred and Fifi in the car. The babies were asleep. Uncle Guy stayed home, so I had a chance to get a ride too. Returning from Christmas Day Mass, John took the wheel and piled in so many people that his view was obstructed. He hit a car coming around a corner. He was going very slow and only gave us a jolt, but the motor was damaged, and we had to abandon the vehicle on the road. Slowly, we plodded up the hill in the cold wind, giving piggyback rides to the little ones. It was several years before we had another car. When Vic went on trips, he had to hitchhike. One day he returned with Old Faithful, which had been his cousin Madeline's transportation for over 15 years, a Chevy with a straight black chassis. It was laden with treasures from the relatives in Providence. Halfway up the hill in a field, Vic had to give up his efforts to drive through the mud. Everybody ran down to unload. It was like another Christmas. Now Vic could drive Uncle Guy to midnight mass. If the roads were icy, Vic would get out before climbing the hill, lie in the snow to adjust the chains, back onto them, and drive precariously up the narrow road. Our hill needed the chains all winter, though they had to be taken off when driving the cleared back roads into town. Those chains were Vic's fetters and took much of his strength. He kept Old Faithful going for several years, searching through the junkyard for parts. Car maintenance was his scourge, as was also the replacement of window panes. They always crack when cut with a dull diamond cutter. Vic had to work with old, poor-quality tools and rusty parts from Rushman's graveyard. He had never owned his own car. Now it was only in his name because he was mostly the one who had a license. Mine had lapsed during the many years that I had either been pregnant or nursing a baby. They were the best years of my life. When Old Faithful broke its front axle on one of the treacherous rocks, we traded it for a large panel wagon. When Vic drove to midnight mass now and opened the rear door of the Chevy, all parishioners stood still to look as one after another in unending line, the wagon disgorged more and more people in all sizes and ages. They filed in, filling 2 pews, the children in front of the adults, so that a light nudge could calm a squirmer. The school children assembled in the downstairs church and arrived in procession. The little girls walked as if on tiptoe, dressed up with white veils, the smallest one carrying the Jesus child on a pillow to the elaborate carved stable scene at the side of the altar. It was surrounded by plain evergreens like the Black Forest. The choir sang all the German and English hymns. Papa's voice could always be heard above the rest. Some curious persons would turn around and look who was so unabashedly praising the Lord. Vic gave the response with the altar boys. He was a good teacher of the Latin responses and explained their meaning. We felt very much at home following the ceremony with the missal. It was our own drama. Mary was our mother, and St. Joseph had never failed us, performing miracles to solve many problems. For years, young Victor or Peter led the procession, as they were the smallest in their classes. Father Freese had the bearing of a kind patron for the children, whom he taught with a little sermonette every day at Mass before school. He had to be firm, sometimes with the altar boys when they wanted to play jokes in the sacristy, but they always celebrated a very correct Mass. The older ones were allowed to read the epistles. Papa had Guy and Victor and later Joseph practice at home so that they would not mispronounce words and read with expression. The boys flattened it out a little when they stood at the lectern, but never forgot the lessons in elocution by Papa and Uncle Guy, and won prizes in speech contests. When we arrived fairly shaken together on top of the hill, the little angels and pages were sound asleep. For the older ones, Winifred had some cocoa and panettone or German Christmas chocolate, the stolen. The 10 years when Uncle Guy was with us were a great education for all of us, not only the children. We offered our little hardships for the restoration of priests to the altar, a mission Uncle Guy shared with us. Chapter 4. The Last Gathering of the Entire Smith Family, Christmas, 1963. It was great to have our 2 young teachers and all our 8 boys home for Christmas vacations. When the young ones leave the nest, it is quite an adjustment for parents. The Salesians of St. John Bosco had accepted our children to their boarding high schools, and they only spent their vacations at home. We did not have to pay tuition. If the students worked hard and became true Christians, it was satisfying. Catherine, Margaret, and Guy had graduated with honors, and Victor and Joseph were following in their footsteps. How many trips Papa had made to West Haverstraw and Goshen, New York, and to Halden and the novitiates in Newton, New Jersey. The big Suburban filled with their brothers and friends and some produce from the farm. We had hardly ever missed a visiting Sunday, even when recently he had the flu and could not regain his energy. In the junior seminary, Vic always received a big welcome from the brothers and priests and the boys and their parents. He made lasting friendships. As Salesian cooperators, we felt like part of the family. The hardest trip was when Catherine was in her 2nd year of the novitiate of the Daughters of the Mary Help of Christians in Newton. She had asked us to come and bring her home to stay. Later that year, Guy also decided not to continue on the road to the priesthood in Don Bosco novitiate. Vic understood his big children well and loved to have them home. He himself in his youth had made a new adjustment when it became clear that the life of the Trappist monks was not for him. After several months, Catherine found a teaching job in St. Jane's School in Easton. Vic was glad that she could help with the driving, as she now had an old station wagon for her own use. Guy wanted to enter the National Guard, but Papa helped him to get a scholarship to start at St. Bonaventure College in Olean, New York, next September. His high marks prepared him well for the college entrance tests. Guy could not know how much it meant to Papa to have him work with him in the garden, the woods, in the carpenter shop, and with the younger boys on weekends. Papa would not admit how much he needed help. Work just would not go forward the way it used to. None of the single men had stayed long, and when Chris was sick or absent, Vic had to care for the needs of his children too. Vic was often impatient that Papa had to rest so often. Though he was only 56, his hair was snow white and slightly receding at the temples. They would sit down and Vic would tell about his drinking days as a newspaperman and how much trouble they got into. Some of his friends had died in the last year. Vic had to give up alcohol altogether and smoking too, before his boys would take that idle habit as a bad example. He warned the young student of a boys' school of the invisible snares that girls would likely lay for him. He told him of the many people who had built Maryfarm and had died. Bill, who dug the well. Steve built Uncle Guy's house, and Uncle Guy himself had left the guidance of the farm to Vic and Winifred. Guy remembered the old carpenter, Mr. O'Connell, too. Especially, Papa urged Guy to stay close to the church, even if its teachings became burdensome. How could he teach the boy about the peace that was in his own heart? Guy would rather have kept on sawing wood. A few days before Christmas, Margaret arrived unexpectedly, as she had gotten a ride from Portchester, where she was teaching 3rd grade in the Salesian school. The younger boys nearly smothered their big sister with love. They considered her their second mother. Margaret took the lively troop down to our house early after Sunday night meeting. It was dark before Guy, Papa, and I stepped out of the door of the basement. We were laughing how Guy had danced with Fifi with the same elegance and rhythm as he had watched Papa step around with her. They both treated poor Fifi like the elegant lady she still dreamt of being. She also enjoyed to hop around with the younger boys. There was frost in the air, settling invisibly on the ground. The moon was surrounded by a large halo. Only a few stars peeked out here and there, competing with the lights in Phillipsburg across the Delaware. They glimmered in all colors at this Christmas season. Papa took a step but slipped and fell, and when Guy lunged for him, he also went down. They struggled to their feet on the icy crust and took me in the middle. Holding tight and taking small steps with a skiing motion, we managed to get to the steeper incline. There we all plopped to the ground. We laughed and tried to regain our feet. It was hopeless. We slid on our seats. We were all bruised, and Papa had crashed on his back by the time we reached a grassy spot where we inched down sideways, holding on to each other, joking when we reached the door of our house only a few 100 feet downhill. It was quite an adventure, and Vic told us that he had several falls also when he had to drag the goat down the hill for breeding, or rather, she had dragged him down the hill. It also came out in a conversation that, felling a tree by himself, the rope had broken, and he had knocked the breath out of his chest when he fell on a rock pile. Vic made light of it all, but later recalling it, it appeared to have been more serious. The following Sunday, while we were gathered around the Victrola and Fifi had a splendid time, a knock came at the door, up here so far from any road. Vic was happy to see his friend Tom Langen and his brother Jim, a lawyer. They were both shaking with the cold. Tom begged Vic to keep his brother for a while, as he had returned to him in a miserable condition, and the temptation to stay in the bars in the city was unsurmountable. Of course, Vic promised to do his best to help Jim, who sat quietly in a corner. It was a long, hard road Vic had to walk with the older man. Vic talked to him for several nights to get him over the shakes, despair, and the desire for more drink. Winifred was a great help and even had him stop the chain smoking for the time he was with us. By Christmas, Jim was his humorous, jovial self, helping the boys pile up wood in the porch toward the expected blizzards, telling tall tales about Rome and many far-off places. He even practiced for a skit to amuse Fifi, spurring the young actors on. The Christopher family left for Brooklyn to spend Christmas with the grandparents when Victor, a senior, and Joseph, a freshman, arrived on Christmas Eve from the seminary. Our house and our joy were full. Vic took all the boys into the woods. He walked slowly, pausing often to look at trees and bushes, looking for the trees that needed felling and marking those which should be saved. The boys begged him that they would keep working and he rest, but he would not hear of it. But again, in a short while, he had to take a blow. The exuberance and wild energy of the lively fellows was frustrating, with a father who for some reason could not keep the pace he had set for many years. His discourses often focused on death. He retold how Uncle Guy died alone, and they found him 8 years ago. Vic could not forget his young niece Eileen. He had offered her one kidney for a transplant, but she had not gotten well enough for it and died last September. Also, his mother's death was fresh on his mind. On her last birthday in the nursing home, she had asked Vic the annual question, "How many are there now?" He bent over to her year and shouted, 10, and held up all his fingers. In her eyes was admiration and wonder. "Glory be to St. Anne. How can you keep them up there on that farm? They will never get to go anywhere." The brave lady had joined his dad finally after 35 years. It must have been the barrenness of winter that made him muse that perhaps he would not live to be much older than his brother and father, who died in their 50th. But the boys, so full of life, only later recalled some of these conversations. The snow was soft and quite deep. Vic had left the car down the hill, and we decided to leave it there and walk to midnight mass. We assembled, bundled up in winter coats, caps, and boots that were more or less waterproof. They had not yet invented a patch that would stay on the rubber boots through snow and ice. The children ran and slid ahead of us. Usually it was Vic who helped me if I was able to go at all, but now I had to take his hand and pull him along. He walked so slowly I was afraid we'd be late, though by now I should have known that though Vic was never early like me, he always arrived in time. He had been singing upstairs, as was his habit when dressing for church. The Ave Maria came to us in his full voice as I was helping the sleepy boys, but now it seemed Vic had to force himself to walk step by step. St. Joseph's Church was festively decorated with a forest of evergreen behind the lifelike figures of the scene in Bethlehem. Small children brought the infant in procession to the manger. Michael and Bernard paired with little girls in white. Peter was one of the acolytes, and Victor had received permission to read the epistle. The choir sang German and American hymns, and Vic's voice could be heard above the hesitant parishioners. To kneel at the altar rail with his wife and children brought visible joy to Vic and new strength. We decided to call a taxi to drive home, a luxury for sure, and Vic protested, but I thought it necessary. We still had to walk up our hill as no taxi dared to climb that rocky road. Even in summer, Omi had to walk up with her cane. The boys had raced ahead of us and caught us on the hill. A string of colored lights greeted us by the man-sized statue of St. Joseph, who had a large cape wrapped around him. In the wind-blown lights, even the bent-over figure of Mary looked nearly alive. It was a large branch which we had dressed up. Before her in the manger lay a baby doll in a white baptismal gown covered with lamb skin. Winifred and Fifi greeted us and invited us to warm up with cocoa and Christmas panettone. Vic just sat there, so very tired, still not ready to admit it. We went home soon. The children had been tucked in already. As Margaret was home, I did not have to worry about them. Tony and Paul were sound asleep, and they tiptoed up to the attic. For Christmas dinner, our large living room was decorated with greens, handmade pictures, and ornaments. The peeling wallpaper was camouflaged. Every leaf had to be put into the round dining table from the Tobler house bought from Hackensack 16 years ago. We gathered up all chairs and stools in the house and put a bench on the long side for the children. Our best china was a mixture of designs with water glasses of all sizes. In the storage room, we had found serving dishes and a huge platter for the bird. There were dishes of cranberries, pickles, and many vegetables in the New England tradition. The Franciscan friars had brought the big turkey and long Italian loaves of white bread, which just for the celebration would replace our staff of life, baked from hand-grown wheat. From the kitchen came the aroma of roast turkey and fresh pies. Fifi carefully carried her favorite mincemeat down the hill, and Winifred had made apple and pumpkin pies that would melt in your mouth. Her brother Joe helped them down the hill. He was kidding Fifi, his best girl, acting like two crooners, though their hair was gray. Joe was always full of fun. Our other guest was Jim Langan. He was quite well now and enjoyed the boys and was glad to be part of the family. He contributed much laughter and helped the children to sing some hymns, even if they were a little off-key. Under our sparkling Christmas tree by the window, we had erected one of the small Christmas crib sets which we had made 23 years ago on Bayard Street. It symbolized our simple, happy life, which in the eyes of the world seemed of little significance. We all looked for seats around the table. Anthony squeezed in his old high chair as the bench was crowded. At least he was taller than Paul now and could even pull his hair. He had started school in September. Before that, the little towhead was following Vic around everywhere, picking up kindling, dragging the logs to the car on the Alcan Highway in our backwoods. He learned to plant onion sets in straight rows, always full of questions and curiosity. A new version of the fair-haired Peter, though up till now he had not shown his mischievous, daring, and thoughtless jokes. Michael walked Tony to St. Mary's Little School every day. The Salesian sisters had first and second grade in one room. Unfailingly, Tony brought the homework of the second graders and was watching everything but what Sister wanted him to learn. It took a while to adjust to be with children his own age. At home, he was always the little brother, with Paul as his companion, as the last Christopher boy had been born dead. None of our children ever had need to go to kindergarten. Fifi loved parties. She was beaming being surrounded by so many boyfriends, big and little. The small ones laughed at her chatter. She exclaimed, "Goody, goody, goody, we're having turkey and all the fixings." The clatter subsided after everybody found a seat, Vic at the head and I at the foot. They bowed their heads. In the silence, I could see that the grace Vic was to say before this festive meal was of greatest importance to him. All were resigned that it would be some time before they would start eating. We salute you, our infant King and Savior. We embrace you, Mary, our loving Mother. We beg you, Joseph, to remain our great provider as you have been all these wonderful years. Bless us here, sweet Jesus, our dear friends, Jim, Winifred, and her good brother Joe, and before all else, Fifi. We thank you for all who have helped us build Maryfarm with us, and are now with you, especially Uncle Guy. They will celebrate with our parents and all the saints the great banquet in heaven. Let us not forget Peter Morin. But for his dream of the Green Revolution, we would not be here now with a chance to give our children the best education. Mary, help of Christians, you have brought the Salesians of St. John Bosco up our hill, and they so kindly have accepted us poor people. They are your true servants. Bless our two big girls who are now engaged in teaching children, as you were the teacher of your divine Son and his friends in the long years that he stayed at home with you. Dear Jesus, guide and protect my dear sisters and their family, and enjoy my good mother, as I always cherish my visits with her, a great lady for her 92 years here on earth. Bless good Aunt Clem in her last months in the home of the Grey Nuns. Lord, I know you will care for Omi, a model of grandmothers, one of your chosen people. It is her Eifline you have given me as a travel companion on my pilgrimage to share all the ups and downs, to live in this bailiwick, having accepted our voluntary poverty, which sometimes is shamefully abundant, that we actually swim in it. This is the most wonderful day. God made himself into a tiny baby who had no home or bed. We who claim to follow him sit at a table full of good things. They are all gifts from friends and benefactors. In return, we give our prayer. The prayers of children go straight to the throne of God. Never forget to pray for all who are so good to us. My God, forgive this poor old man for not having sufficient words to praise you. The whole world celebrates Christmas, even if they don't think of the barren stable and the baby nourished at his mother's breast, or of his cross for the remainder of the years. At least for this one season, all the giving and caring mirrors the immense love that is there for each one of us. The charity of men does not reach as far as to the many starving children in the world, but Jesus cradles them in his arms as he never even forgets a sparrow. He will gather them all in his happy kingdom. We will be surprised who will meet at the royal banquet. We beg your help, Mother of Jesus and our Mother. Press us to your healing breast. Perhaps for a long time this may be the last Christmas that all 10 of you, with your mom and papa, will be all together. I cherish this day more than I can tell you. God is in our hearts, and there is love enough to go around. That is our wealth. The more people come who need love, the more love there is. Let us just spread it around. We may not have more to give than a cup of cold water, but Jesus assured us it's to him we give it. Michael sneaked out of his seat at that moment and disappeared into the kitchen. He dipped a big glass of well water from the bucket and brought it to Papa. He received a bear hug in return. Papa held up Michael's arm and laughingly pronounced in a loud voice, "Let's have some of that turkey now, and the stuffing, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, creamed onions, and all the other sumptuous things." They were all very well blessed. Amen. A loud chorus echoed the amen, and we started to serve. Everybody was watching what the one next to him had and that they were taken care of, and passed the dishes on. There were exclamations of pleasure. Winifred could roast a turkey and make the stuffing to perfection. When Papa finally finished carving the bird, he sat back smiling, but not eating. After a while, Margaret looked up from her piled-up plate, got up and brought a fork from the kitchen, as Papa had none. He'd never asked for it, rather sit there and watch the others eat. But now, with the right tool, he tasted everything on the plate. I had fixed for him and smacked his lips. What a feast! It's delicious, delightful, delectable. 3 cheers for the wonderful cooks, also for the ones who licked the pots. As Tony and Paul started to giggle, he knew who that was. Bernie echoed Papa, "It sure is delicious. May I have seconds?" "It's the best we ever had." Fifi chimed in too. "They give us something good for a change," which was agreed upon with much laughter. Then the kerosene lamps were lit. Many hands cleared the table quickly. Lively conversations came from the kitchen when Margaret and Joseph washed the dishes, with Guy and Victor drying, exchanging notes about all their friends in Goshen. Catherine kept order among the younger tribe and kept Peter and Michael from snatching nibbles from the leftover turkey. Papa heard Bernie complaining about his older brothers and called him to his side. "Keep those corners up. Come on, smile. You may not feel like laughing, but don't show it. Perhaps you're right, but don't insist on it too much. It does not matter that much. After a while, it was Peter who got too noisy. "Hey, Pete," Papa called, "are you showing off for Aunt Fifi? I know you think you're hot stuff, but keep it under your hat. You can't always charm your way through life. Show them you have guts behind it. Let them know what you're really made of." We sat around the cozy potbelly stove, Papa in the antique leather chair. Finally, Winifred pulled the reluctant Fifi up to her home. "I'll escort you," said Vic, "but you have Joe, your special boyfriend, to hang on to. You don't need a lout like me." When Jim said goodnight too, Vic thanked him for sharing our simple celebration. Margaret hustled in the younger ones to get ready for bed. Papa thanked Michael for being the best water carrier we had. He still called Bernard his co-pilot, as he had given him so much joy on several trips to Providence, even when he was only 3 years old. Again, he encouraged Paul what a great teacher he was for Tony, and what great joy our two youngest are to him and Mom. They gave us a big hug and sang in the chorus, "Good night, Mummy, good night, Papa, have a good sleep," in their nightly ritual. Papa had much to tell to his big children after hearing their account of the seminary in Goshen and their school expectations. They wished they had listened more intently to recall Papa's words later. The joy of feeling God's goodness and the love of so many years was visible in Papa's twinkling eyes. Joy he could bring to others was his joy. He had proved by his lifestyle that his own plans did not matter. He went along with what was indicated to him as God's will through others. Where and how you serve the Lord does not matter. He needs workers in his fields everywhere. Just keep up your true faith. That means stick to the truth, even if it's not easy to prove that it is true. Make yourself a rule. Put right things first and keep the good that is in you always ready for the right use. Keep your minds and your hearts aimed at things worth loving. That is what is meant by chastity. You will have your falls, but don't forget, forgiveness is God's hallmark. He will deal mercifully with us offenders, and in that knowledge is our peace. You may all be scattered around by next Christmas. This is likely to be the last year when we are all together. Don't ever forget to care for each other. You are the surest friends you will ever have, and your younger brothers look up to you. Papa's words were prophetic. In Lent, he had to walk the path of suffering with his Lord to the very end. He had to say farewell to his loved ones, and he blessed each one before he died. He had already finished his work on this earth and joined Uncle Guy as a new star in the sky, as the song said that the children put together. It was late on that Christmas night when all had retired to the attic. Vic put his arms around my shoulder and recited from the plaque we had received for our wedding. Happy is the man who fears the Lord and walks in his ways. He shall eat the fruit of his handiwork. His wife shall be as a fruitful vine in the recesses of his house. His children like olive plants around his table. Blessed is he and favored all the days of his life. Chapter 5, The Christmas Comet, 1974. Once in a lifetime, a comet might become visible to the naked eye, and the great advertisement of the comet Kohoutek received had everybody guessing whether it was an omen of the end of the world. They spelled it all out for us, that we'd be able to see it before Christmas, 1/2 hour before the rising of the sun in the eastern sky. Then the comet would go around the sun, and after emerging would be visible after sunset in the west. There was some disappointment that it was not as clear as had been expected, and it'd be hard to spot without a telescope. It would be the perfect show for the 3 astronauts in Skylab who were circling in outer space, nearly forgotten by most people. They would become witnesses of a very unusual show. The comet was to be visible from everywhere on the Earth. I rose before sunrise on December 22nd and looked out of the eastern dining room window for the red glow where the sun was to rise, but the sky was covered with clouds, and I resolved to try again the following day. It was still dark when I looked out on the 23rd. Hard to tell if there were clouds. After my eyes got used to the dark sky, I spotted a few stars. In the southeast, from where the sun would rise, were only a few wisps of clouds. I nearly had a clear view to the horizon with only a few bare trees sticking up in their arms. I was soon aware of a bright light, much larger than a star, right at the horizon, yet far enough above it to be sure it was not of the earth. I woke my friend to have a witness. Her eyes were sharper, and she also was sure it was a longish light with a point at the end, looking nearly like a T. The trees blocked part of the view, and we could not be too sure. As the light from the rising sun a little further south was getting brighter, we could not see it well anymore. But I was so awake I did not want to go back to bed. I could climb the last hill to the top where no trees would block visibility. Even if I got there too late today, perhaps I would get another chance later. It was a cold morning, and I decided to bundle up and find out the best spot from where to view the comet. I climbed slowly up the steep slope to the cross, which is visible from the highway far in the valley. The air was biting in my face, and the sun took a long time to come up, though a larger and larger stretch of the horizon turned red. This experience of waiting for the sun on top of the hill, where the view reaches over 2 states, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, over towns, farmlands, and mountain ranges, was a great Christmas present. I saw tracks of rabbits, birds, pheasants, and deer in the light snow. Our little dog, who had accompanied me, followed them to their source. The gradual change from the dark and shadowy cold to the spreading pink all over the eastern and southern sky to the final bright glow of the sun peeping over the hills was worth battling the cold and tiredness. As if life itself had come again, the warmth of the sun changed the whole morning and made the blood flow freely again. I had turned the corner from the north slope into the south pasture. The wind there was stopped by the trees, but the view toward the east was blocked too. I went still a little higher to the very spot where our dream house was going to be built when we came to this hill over 30 years ago. From here, I could see the spot where the sun was coming up unobstructed. Unmistakably, there was a small white line as if a jet plane was starting its exhaust, but it never grew longer. It just stayed there, sometimes brighter and a little wider on one side. A definite line and no airplane in sight. As the light from the sun grew brighter, it faded, but was still there. I nearly ran down the hill to show it to my friend. Glancing back at it, it was still there. But when I came to the living room, the sun was already glaring, and the trees hid the white line, and I could only tell her breathlessly that I surely saw the comet Kohotak on the day before Christmas Eve. The following mornings were cloudy, and there were no second chances. In the little house we lived, we thought we were high up. We can watch the sunrise, but up by the cross you can really get on top of the world. When you then go farther to the corner of the south pasture, you're above all human life. Here the force of the sun glows the longest and wakens the trees and the fields into spring when the ice on the north slope is only melting. But the airplane that flew right to the spot where I saw the comet and then went on its way had a much more vivid view. Above that, 3 men, pioneers in a weightless life, were even closer to scanning the secrets of the heavens. So no matter how high you are, you can go ever higher. Even if you're in the lowlands, you can stay attuned to the night sky and the soft calling of the birds at sunrise and the even softer but most urgent calling of God in varied languages. If you've watched and waited, the Messiah can raise you to the highest heaven with him. Do not miss his call. Scientists tell us how many miles long the comet's tail is, but few eyes have even seen it as a speck without telescopes. Yet there was a feeling of expectation this Christmas, a sense of urgency, a trembling in front of the scope of the universe that will take a little time before being drowned by the platitudes of everyday life. When will you hear the TV announcer say again, "Get up before the sunrise and see the Christmas comet"? The Christmas star has become real to us. Now we must go to the stable and to the babe with his mother. We had built a cave resembling that inhospitable abode right in our big living room from the stones of the old rock garden, and the beautiful figures that had delighted our Fifi for all her last years looked very natural, climbing over rocky hills with Mary and Joseph in the cave awaiting the child. It was the most beautiful Christmas celebration. Father Ernest had erected an altar and celebrated Mass in his golden ordination vestments. There were only a few friends, all deeply moved by his sermon about the poverty God came to earth to share with us. His little dog looked up with understanding too. Only Tony, our youngest, was with us, and the family had taken him as one of their own. Mr. Reichert was not only his teacher and valued Tony's help with the 7th graders, he treated him like his oldest son, and Tony rejoiced to be finally a big brother to his 5 children, as at home he was always the little brother. Our living room had turned into a sanctuary. Father had left the open Bible on the table, and when I looked at it, it said to me, "Now doest thou dismiss thy servant in peace, according to your promises? For my eyes have seen the salvation of the Lord." I was thinking of the sun rising over that far horizon, and somewhere there, visible only to the eyes of faith, was Vic waiting for me. Would I be able to be with him soon, no longer blinded by the brilliance of God? But God had said, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways." And it became clear before spring that indeed God had dismissed us from these acres where we had spent so many happy years. And we were at peace, knowing our work here was accomplished, with all the children on their own and so many of our loved ones with the Lord. We truly had seen the salvation of the Lord vividly brought into our souls with his festive Christmas celebration. Winifred went on to become the light and strength of the Immaculate Conception Parish and Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Allentown and find a family in that parish. I was free to care for my mother in California. She is one of his people Israel. The home I made for her in the last years made her inglorious in the Lord. And now finally, Mom's Christmas book. She wrote a poem called Settling Down in 1981. After crossing the country north-south and east-west, lugging all that I own in 3 heavy bags, after being a guest with the young generation, I found a small house with a brave kindred soul. A nook for my bed and a den for my writing. I cooked meals for 2 and baked for all kin. Washed clothes still by hand, have a sister and a pal, a good place to settle down. Boulders and foothills are right by our yard. The young ones drop in, or they call. Those who are far come to visit and ski, or splash in the brooks, climb high glaciers. They tent in gold canyons, breathe thin mountain air. They are glad I will settle down. I found teachers and learners, a center for caring, encouraging studies, writing and sharing, working crafts with friends, some from German lands. A home shared by elders is here at hand. Boulder Hospice trains and welcomes me, part of a team as a volunteer, if I will settle down. In May came a call, fly with us to the north. Rotor blades churn, forests, rivers, Alaska, snow peaks, glacier bays, eagles and bears. Just 5 days, plus a visit to Evie, my aunt, who at 90 longs to join husband and son. Her feet weary, a traveler round the world, soon forever to settle down. In the fall, a big bird takes me east, back home, to Vic's grave at the foot of our Maryfarm. Chat with my daughter, 3 sons, my best friend, share her trip to Lourdes from enthralled memory. Farewell, it must be, the Rockies are home, where the echoes shout, settle down, settle down. A new mission awaits me to share faith and hope, when God calls brave sufferers home to stand by their side with a challenging team to whom death is life's final goal, who bring love and peace and assure the sick, just relax, trust, and settle down. I can rally new strength from the Sacred Heart. Our parish of zeal lets us take part to sponsor those who seek the truth. We invite them to learn, to believe, to belong. The restless probing I shared in my youth, I found Vic, his joy, and his selfless love, and, thank God, we settled down. At year's end, 1981, Eva Maria Elizabeth Gretz Smith. We love you, Mom.
Well, we did want to say happy birthday to Dr. Fred.
Are we going to sing it or just say it or what?
You think two of us will sound?
Well, Dr. Fred, we're going to try anyway.
I don't know how the two of us would sound together.
Well, we try it anyway.
Let's harmonize.
Yeah, where do you have the mic? Over here?
It's right there.
All right. Anywhere at all is all right, huh?
Yeah, anywhere.
All right, Dr. Fred, we're going to try, me and I,
It's going to be harmony.
harmonize a little on happy birthday. All right, Keith?
Okay.
Sit together. Go ahead, hit it.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Dr. Fred. Happy birthday to you. May the good Lord bless you. May the good Lord bless you. May the good Lord bless you, Dr. Fred. May the good Lord bless you. I'd offer him some of these delicious chocolates, but Aunt Fifi took 4 of them.
Yeah, well, I don't think we could get them quite through that wire somehow, could we, Keith? Now, we should say hello to Aunt Muriel and all the rest of the folks. We don't know where or how this message is going to arrive, whether it'll be on Cape Cod or where. But in any case, we want to salute everybody who may be listening at that time.
Maybe Aunt Clemmy, too.
Aunt Clem, too, it could be. Somehow it might get to her. And Selma, Uncle Max,
Uncle Mac, Aunt Madeline.
Aunt Madeline.
Let's see if we skipped anybody.
Well, anyway, we'll say again, everybody. We want to send greetings from here to there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to cut the tape here, and we're going to take it outside where the rest of the folks are at the table.
All right.
Play it back through to this point, and then cut the playback and make, then cut in on the recording, and whatever happens from there is what
All right.
Okay?
Okay.
All right, give it the deep 6.